están esperando.
We are the ones we've been waiting for.
Tú y yo somos lo que nosotros estamos esperando. And I say out loud, resounding, sí se puede.
We've been waiting for.
Y otra vez, tú y yo somos las personas que están esperando. Sí, se puede.
We've been waiting for.
They say you walked around in the flesh, and if that is true, then I guess you must understand how it feels when your faith is wavering. And you want to pray, but can't find the words to say. Oh God, what a mess I'm made of things, and no reversing it. That's how it seemed. A second chance from you is always guaranteed. No, they don't accrue. But you say, my child, take as many as you need. You're my joy, you're my peace, and all my cares I'll cast on thee. Never take your love away. It took a little while to understand that you don't operate with the mind of man. And I'm so glad you don't, 'cause I surely would have lost your love. And I thank you for never giving up on me.
Oh, he's great. I've known him since college, so we've worked together a bunch.
When is this session supposed to be?
I think they're supposed to be around.
Okay. All right. Good. Yeah. Oh my God, okay. Amazing. So, so this, she said we'll figure out how we'll meet. And this morning she texted me. And you told her today, right? I told her about meeting you.
favorite colors. Like the red and the green mics.
Josh, one of these waters is yours.
I've got one. They think you really need to hydrate. Yes. Hey, good cat.
Good job, Laura. I kind of threw that at Tom. Okay, we're going to get started. Edna, I put you in my sermon. And I didn't tell you. I did. You inspire me. So many of you have inspired me. It was your turn today to get outed. Hi, everybody. How wonderful of you to stick around and talk to me and Josh about beloved community. This is Josh. The rabbi of East End Temple and my friend, and I am Jacqui.
The Reverend Dr. Jacqui Lewis.
Josh and I have been having some really good conversations about this topic, but today we're going to start again with what new insights we have from worship. The whole thing was a sermon, right? So what do you want to say about worship? Oh my goodness, that was terrible. What do you want to say about worship today?
It was heartfelt, and it conveyed in music what couldn't be conveyed in words.
That's true.
Which is, we got to harmonize. What does that look like?
Ooh.
And I actually wonder about the history here. My understanding is in the U.S., the first integrated jazz band was Benny Goodman's.
That's what I heard.
And so it's black and Jewish jamming. And so how do we get our groove back? How do we start jamming together again? But by the way, speaking of bad jamming, Jacqui was with me in the back watching me kind of syncopated-ish with the music.
I thought you did pretty good. I thought that was pretty good back there. We were both kind of trying to jam to all the songs. But talk a little bit more about getting our groove back, because that really does imply a truth about Jewish and black solidarity that has been historic. So let's talk about it.
So I feel like we have, not in this case, but I want to start with the premise that we have been having the wrong conversation since the civil rights movement to present. We find all of the things that can possibly drive a wedge between black folks, Jewish folks, and black Jewish folks, and then we talk about them ad nauseum. So a typical conversation would be, what are your views on Kanye West?
I don't like him.
Jacqui Lewis, not an anti-Semite. Right. And so that would be the great conversation. And then, Joshua Stanton, what are your views on segregation? And I would say, I remain against segregation. and so it's, right. Why can't we talk about the ambiguous and the difficult?
Right.
And one of the things that bubbled up in our conversation was my growing awareness of my own racism. And why have we never talked about that in the decade of friendship we had before today? Right. And I was just reflecting to Jacqui and some other folks that when I go on the train, almost sometimes consciously, definitely subconsciously, I'm like, black person, Hispanic person, Hasidic person, white appearing person, me. I got a lot of racism in me. And I think as a Jewish person, I'm terrified of admitting it, lest my pain be discounted.
Ooh, that right there. Yeah. That's so honest and vulnerable. Yeah. I think black people, I was Steph Colin.
Oh, yes.
We have amazing friends in common. Steph Colin and Jill Jacobs and Sharon Brous are some of my favorite rabbis, and we're all in this thing called Auburn Senior Fellows. And one time, Auburn Senior Fellows tipped over gently to talk about anti-Semitism and racism, and it almost broke us. It really did. It did. If y'all are watching, sorry, it's true. It was so hard because, in fact, we are Sikh and Muslim and Jewish and Buddhist and comedians and clergy and, and I'm going to say it this way, it felt to me like the connection was still pretty tentative and therefore maybe a little on the surface. And something happened and it was about Linda Sarsour, who's Muslim and Palestinian, and either Steph or Sharon, then they were all trying to be honest about the complicated nature of Palestine, Israel, and occupation, right? My friends that are Jewish use the word occupation, so I'm gonna use it. But as we started talking about it, you could just feel the shoulders went up, people were tense, and the worst thing, and I love you, Lisa, but then one of our African-American colleagues kind of jumped in, like, let me help y'all see this. And I was like, oh, no, no. Let them see it by themselves. So what I'm trying to say, love, is of course we didn't get to it till we got to it, because I think it requires always more trust than you imagine to really get to it, right? And what got us to it is the double whammy of I had a fire, and therefore you and I got closer.
Yes.
And built more bonds of trust, and therefore I think, and the world is on fire for both of us. So I think both of those things crack open your heart a bit. My friend Laura's a therapist, so when I talk like this, she's very excited.
I'm glad you got us some water.
Yeah. She'd be like, that's correct. Internal family systems, yep. So it's true. We needed to get to the place where the inside, squishy, soft, vulnerable parts of us could come out because the outside stuff happened, is what I think. What do y'all think about that? Are you nodding at that? Yeah.
I was wondering, in part I view a lot of stuff happening between black folks, Jewish folks, and black Jewish folks as being in different conversations that are getting smaller and smaller and oversimplified ridiculously. And so part of me just wants to ask, what are the conversations in the black communities happening around racism right now?
Yeah.
And I'm happy to tell you about the stories happening in the Jewish communities around antisemitism. And I'm using plural by design. It's not like,
you know, more than one community. Right.
As much as I wish you represented everybody, you represent a lot of people, but not everybody.
That's right. So that's a really good question. And can I wrap one thing on the other question before we go to that? I want to talk a little bit about our hurt people thing. I just want to introduce that again, because we had that conversation before in the other talk, that in fact, we are walking wounded. We are just walking wounded. And I will say black people are wounded from centuries of white supremacy. Jewish people are wounded from centuries of white supremacy, and the real threat to Jewish life that happened in the Holocaust that too many people try to act like didn't really happen, which I don't understand to save my life. But so we're wounded people. We Jewish black people were wounded, and white people are wounded too. White people are wounded too. And they're wounded because the soul sickness of white supremacy hurts every frickin' body. It just does. Nobody feels good about it. Not really. You're watching the thing, you're like, ugh, right? It's like, whatever. Nobody feels good about it. So we're walking wounded and wounding each other often without intention, but it doesn't make it right. We're just wounded people, wounding people, hurt people, not conscious of why we set up, duplicate, revisit the systems of oppression that have oppressed us. We will set them up again all day and twice on Sunday. We just do. It's like it's what we know how to do. And then we're doing it and thinking, this is really crappy, but we're doing it anyway, right?
One of the things that I feel like I'm getting a master class from you in Middle Collegiate Churches, giving East End Temple a master class in becoming a truly multicultural, multiracial, multi-faith house of worship. And you mentioned hurt people. We talked earlier about hurt people can heal people.
Yes, yes.
Hurt people can also hurt themselves.
Oh, yes, Josh.
And so one of the pieces that I'm keenly aware of as an Ashkenazi rabbi is the way in which black Jews are basically put in the middle. It's like, choose your primary identity.
Yes.
And in our community, which I like to think of as very progressive, I have heard from a large number of Jews of color about the sheer number of times when they come to Shabbat services, when afterwards they are asked about what brings them here, when they're complimented in sort of like, your Hebrew is really good. Sometimes literally, your English is really good. Sometimes saying, oh, you're a convert to Judaism, like we heard on Brian Lehrer, and it's like, no, I was born Jewish. I am black and Jewish, I'm Hispanic and Jewish, I am, insert any number of hyphens, and Jewish, and you're not more Jewish than me. So part of me wants to ask, as we start to work towards the place when, if there are 15 to 20% of American Jews identify as people of color, what is it at our synagogue? 3%, 5%, maybe 10%? It's very clear that there's a lot keeping Jews of color out of quote-unquote mainstream Jewish institutions. Yeah. How do we stop hurting ourselves and our own people?
Well, aren't you just with the light questions today? I think that lots of Christendom is segregated still. Dr. King famously said 11 o'clock is the most segregated hour in America, and it still is. It still is. And in fact, at one of the seminaries on the West Coast where you would think would be very open and liberal, they actually were teaching in evangelism classes the best way to grow your church is to keep it monocultural. Because people don't want to sit next to people who don't look like them and talk about Jesus.
This is recent? This is not like 50 years ago?
No, this is recent. So what is this? It is the way, I write about this in Fierce Love, the way hurt people, wounded people, traumatized people really do revert to their own tribe in a very understandable way, right? We're under threat. Where are my people, right? We're under threat. Where are my folks? Queer folks go to make a caucus. Black folks make a caucus. We'll come back to what happens in those spaces. And we do it because we are animals.
Yep.
And we want to be with the ones that are like us because we think it's going to be better and okay. Here's the project. All the people are our people. That's the project. The project is increasing our sense of tribe. And how do we do that? These relationships. In our community, middle people are saying, you're my people. I'm sitting next to my people. She's a curly-haired biracial woman, but she's my people, right? I'm sitting next to my people. He's a son who has a Jewish mother and a Presbyterian father. The who our people are thing widens as we have new experiences, as we have new conversations, as we say, oh, I have this in common with Molly, I have this in common with Matt, right? And if we don't get pushed to do it, we will stick with our own kind and we will die with our own kind.
So it's a continual project.
I think so.
Every week we've got to have something to help people take their next step. I
think so. And I think, Josh, if we can think of it as a spiritual practice, or let's even say an ethical practice. I'm not trying to should on anybody, right? I'm just saying, wouldn't life be better if you weren't just with your own kind? So how do you teach that? The theater teaches that. This is a company doing I'm looking at my friend Matt who does I'm looking at Mark who teaches. I'm looking at Karen who's a clergy working in making a world better, hospitality. The relationships that we build, the art, the dancing, the relationships we build that automatically, naturally put us in a flow with people that are different, that's the places where love thrives. That's the places where walls come down and barriers are broken. And we don't have to be like, we must so-and-so. But if we expose our children, like if our children do the Freedom School together this summer,
yes,
it's just like, oh, those Jewish kids. Well, what's that? Oh, they have a yarmulke. Okay, but what is that? Why? Curiosity, and so it isn't, let's be colorblind and pretend like we're the same. We're not. And also, let's not ascribe value to the differences we see. Yeah. Let's be curious about the differences we see as a part of a life that is imaginative and faithful, is what I think. Does that make sense?
So 100% yes. And for the Jewish community, we're at this really weird moment that does not have a lot of historical precedence. we are at once incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah.
In terms of hate crimes based on religion, we're actually the majority. Like, there are a lot of religions in this country, and we win. Everyone wants to hate on us, apparently. It's this weird duality that those who hate us really act on it. And that on average, we are the most liked religious community in America. How do we possibly hold both truths at once? That the typical person we meet in the street, maybe they have prejudices, maybe they have assumptions, but on average, typical Americans feel very positively about Jews across all kinds of other definitional boundaries.
Right.
And then those who hate us really want to hate us.
Yeah.
And so it's almost a mindset challenge. What are we supposed to focus on? How do we protect ourselves from hate without blocking out the love? How do we acknowledge that we've kind of been one of the rare, if not only, frankly, subgroups, racially triangulated all over the place, that has lived the American dream, proven it not to be myth, and yet we're still having gunmen coming into our houses of worship and spending 10% of our budgets on security. So how do we're basically totally confused, and we are like the awkward kid at every dance party. We're like, it's middle school dance time. We're on the edges, wallflowering at the edges of intersectionality because everyone's like, well, are you white? And we're like, I'm Ashkenazi, and then not everybody's Ashkenazi, but, and then, there's sort of mainstream America, meaning, you can assimilate into whiteness, but only around the periphery. So stay the awkward kid around the edges.
You're not white enough.
Yeah, you're white-ish. Like, you can move to the suburbs, we'll sell you homes in your own enclave. And yeah,
Keep you in your own ghetto.
Yeah, be part of white flight, just not in this neighborhood. And so it's this weird, we don't even have language in the intersectional movement, certainly. In the Jewish community, in any area I've been, we don't have language for the Ashkenazi American condition. And then, of course, the Ashkenazi community that's sort of white passing from Eastern Europe, if you were to go to Israel, the majority of people based on American racial caste system would be identified as people of color. Not so in the United States. Most of us have some sort of heritage in Eastern Europe. And then you have 15 or 20% of American Jews are people of color, and it's like they're made to be the awkward kid in the group of awkward kids. So like, how do we stop being so darn awkward?
I don't know. That's a good one. I don't know. But there is something you're saying that resonates for me. I'm going to go to the first question about what are the conversations that happen in the black rooms? In the black rooms. When you're not there. Dun, dun, dun.
No, I thought there were only secret Jewish rooms.
No, there's definitely some black rooms, and you're not there, and we're talking about it. And, I would bet you what you just said, Josh, if someone blindfolded themselves and heard you say it, they could think a black man was saying that thing too, right? That a black man could be saying, a black woman could be saying, a black artist, dancer, teacher, professor could be saying, yeah, man, we are the awkward outsider, almost insider, especially if you think about Isabel Wilkerson's caste, which is also class. By the time you get to be a middle-class, black, functioning, relatively high-paid, didn't get shot yesterday, whatever, that kind of a person would be articulating that we would be saying, my friends are nodding, we would be saying, well, we kind of made it, we kind of overcame, but not really, because in fact, when you're in your car, after you come out that black room, after you leave that black job, which is good paying, good salary, you're just black Negro sitting in the car. When I had a short afro, driving from the shore to Princeton to go to seminary every day, I was profiled at least 3 times a week. I'm not kidding. Followed by police with my little short afro, looking like a boy, I guess, back here, profiled 3 times a week. And I'm profiled as a black woman in stores. Like, these are not stereotypes, am I? People follow you, stand by you, stand near you. So awkward is we've kind of overcome. Awkward is some black people, Oprah, Obama, okay, Michelle, people don't really think of them as black anymore. It's white people don't think of them as black. And some of the black people probably don't think of them as black anymore, if we're honest. That would be an inside conversation. Are you black enough? Would be an inside conversation. Ooh, yeah? And like, was Arthur Ashe black enough with his tennis playing self? You know, is Obama black enough? Fine, damn. But is he black enough, though? Right? With his white mama. I'm just saying, is Oprah black enough? Because she didn't put enough black people on her show. She's black as she want to be, but her show was not black enough. So those kinds of, the way white supremacy works is somebody has to be outside. So you can be in a black family. I'm going inside dynamics now, inside the black room. You could be in a black family, and the light-skinned kid could be the one that's outside. Colorism, right? Or the dark-skinned kid could be the one outside because of colorism, right? Or the didn't make it one in an achieving family, right? So this stuff is insidious and morphs and shows up in so many ways because white supremacy gives us caste. And where do you fit?
Can I ask a question that came up a little bit in our prior conversation? It was about reparations. And I do think that a lot of American Jews, like what is a really big Shabbat here? It's refugee Shabbat. It's we all escaped stuff. It's immigrant story. It's acculturation and making it. And in the way that we tell the story, it's making it after the original sin of America had already been, quote unquote, addressed in the Civil War. Reparations, not our issue. First of all, everyone's talking about reparations and no one, very remarkably few people describe what they could be.
Right.
And second of all, how do we call into the conversation Black Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, folks who don't tell their story in a way that describes black suffering and indigenous suffering in our country?
Well, that's an excellent question. I'm going to come back and ask you one related to it. You know, I'm going to say a thing that might get said in a black room first. I know I would say it in my room. There are very few places in the country, in the world, very few countries in the world, that's what I want to say, that have had the American slavery experience. Like, I'm sorry, but if you're black in America and your ancestors were enslaved, that is a unique trauma. And nobody black whose parents, whose grandparents, whose great-grandparents, nobody black who grow up in this country and their parents were enslaved would buy into anything that sounded like somebody had the same experience. We would reject it. I would say close to that experience is the Holocaust, right? I would say that. And I would say close to that experience is indigenous annihilation and genocide, absolutely. But person to person mostly, not people who are thinking about race and culture and stuff like we are, be like, damn it, nobody else had their foot cut off if they were trying to escape, right? Nobody else got stolen off the shores, got their children ripped out of their bodies. Nobody else had iron shit on their neck. Like, nobody else had that. When they made the Indian slaves, they didn't have that. They had a lot of other crap, but they didn't have that. So there's a way in which, Josh, not in a kind of like my stuff's worse than yours way, I think Black America wants America to own its particular crap toward Black people. Am I right about that? Yeah. It's like, you know, I've been to Israel so many times. I've been to Germany. Germany owned what it did to the Jews. America hasn't owned what it's done to blacks. People been owning what they did to the Japanese. They owned a little bit what they did to the indigenous. Do not own the particular horror of chattel slavery and its permanent mark on the soul of Black people. Nobody else had that. So that's one way I would answer the question, is America, not Jewish America. America needs to own that. And then I think the second thing I'd say is, because of the way it went down, America also needs to own the collegiate church stole Manhattan from the Lenape. I say stuff straight up all the time. We stole it. We have to own that this whole land belonged to humans that were not y'all who came and took it. And this whole land was built by the black enslaved people and then those indigenous people who became slaves and Chinese people who were cheap labor. So if you walk down the street of New York, whoever you are, you owe reparations to black people. That's what I say. If you, friends who are coming, we're so glad you're here, and I know some of you all went to the wrong address, and so please come on in. If you eat corn, if you go to the grocery store, if you get on the subway, you owe reparations to indigenous people, period. Now that's my calling in, right? Nobody has to be particularly like,
it wasn't my fault per se, but yeah. I am an American and I have a duty of care to.
Period. There is a benefit that happens because you're American on the planet, because African Americans were slaves, because indigenous people were, wrestled off the land. That's what I want people to understand. So it's a human project.
Can I talk about reparations from Germany for a second? Please. So I do want to talk about reparations as someone whose family has received them and also been denied them in different cases. So again, this goes to, I'm going to delve into Jewish privilege, Jewish lack of privilege, and reparations. So why doesn't the privilege conversation work for many Jews? My family was quote unquote privileged in Germany until very quickly they weren't. So notions of privilege come with notions of permanence that Jews are not blessed to have. Literally, the German government, my family was very well off in Berlin until it wasn't, and there is a Pizarro painting that the German government has said is part of the patrimony, it is part of the states, and therefore they cannot give the proceeds of its sale to my family because it must remain in Germany. And so there are moments like this that are really awkward and weird where reparations don't happen. I want to talk about where they do because I'm actually a dual German-American citizen because I am incredibly grateful to an unsung hero, probably the most boring and important politician of our time, Angela Merkel. I say this seriously. She's a physicist. She is remarkably boring. And she did one thing that made me able to get a German passport without clenching my fists. She brought in 1 million Syrian refugees. In a country that was known for whiteness defined in the most Henry Ford kind of way, in a country that racialized my family with stunning efficacy and cut down the majority of my family tree, they brought in 1 million people. In a country of 80 million, 1 million people is noticeable on your street and in your neighborhood, and really did remarkable work, not perfect work, but helped set up those refugees. In my mind, and in the Jewish concept of tshuva, of actually not just atoning, but changing your actions prospectively, Germany did it, and I could get a German passport without cringing. And so a part of me wonders, I acknowledge that, to your point, there are no perfect analogies, but there is some learning to be done. I felt like there was, you would say in Hebrew, it's like tikkun olam, healing the world. There was a little bit of tikkun, a little bit of repair of a gaping wound that was enough that I could move forward rather than just looking back. And so a part of me is wondering, again, thinking aloud, not making pronouncements and trying to learn, are there kinds of tikkuns that America could do? And how do we do it? I mean, that's where I want to walk forward is how do we tikkun this olam? How do we actually do the work? We don't just whitewash King's birthday and ignore his death day. We don't just talk about, civil rights movement as a historical fact, but we move it forward. So what is the moving forward we can do in the spirit of Angela Merkel, who healed a really broken part of my heart? What can we do?
Josh, that's the whole ball game right there. When you think about the looking back, the Sankofa look back to go forward, America just screwed black people, screwed indigenous people too. But I'm black, so I'm gonna talk about that, right? Screwed indigenous people, right? Took the land, took the kids off the land, put them in boarding schools, punished them, tortured them. If they spoke their own language. I mean, horrible, horrible, horrible stuff. And horrible stuff to black people, right? And it's the way that indigenous people have been swallowed by America, pushed on reservations by America, so few left. I mean, oh my God, right? The difference between that and black folks is that there's a whole bunch of black people everywhere, and we can't pass for anything.
Yeah.
Here we go. Here we were black, and here we are, right? So there's a strangeness about that, right? Indigenous people almost disappeared, and also they can fade in. And black people not disappeared. We have reproduced, and we are science and art and drama and dance and math and literature and all the things, and we're still black every day. And in the way that America is probably a little ashamed at the way it's done all the bad things to all the people, is definitely, I feel like white America sometimes looks at black people and is like, God, I'm just so ashamed right now. I can't breathe. I'm so upset. I'm so ashamed. My black people are not even, I'm so ashamed I can't even look at you. I can't even apologize to you. I feel so bad about what I did to you, I'm gonna do it again. I'm just gonna do it again. I'm not gonna really look at you.
You're living proof of my sins.
Yes, exactly. And maybe I'll say, racism is America's original sin, and I read that book and I'm done. But I'm not done, and I can hardly bear. I'm white and I can hardly bear to look at your beauty and your talent and what you did despite this shit that we did, that I'm paralyzed and I can't do anything. So that's a dynamic, and I know race in America is about more than black and white. It's about Asian and, you hear me, I know that. But the black-white dyad is the original fault line, and 40 acres and a mule.
Yep.
Emancipation, 40 acres and a mule. Juneteenth, 40 acres and a mule. Did anybody get 40 acres and crap? No, that did not happen. There was no, Reconstruction was met with horrible violence, lynchings and rapings and mutilations and killing, because we really don't want you free. And this is the cycle, like you get a few black people succeeding in a place, and then that's enough. And the door is shut, and the competition happens, and the crabs in a barrel happens, and all we can hand is one black leader, one black shiny actress, one black winner. That's all we can do. The rest of you know, we can't let you in. Because why? We will not be white enough. If you black folks really get what's due you, our whiteness feels emptied, feels powerless, feels void. I know that this is true. If people want to frown and think I'm not right, this is a psychological issue. This is an introjection, projection issue where white people, everybody projects. I look at Ishmael and I see his beard. I'm having a feeling about his beard. I'm projecting, damn, that's hot. I wish I could have a beard. I'm a girl, whatever. Right? There's always a projection, right? And there's always an introjection. I'm looking at Ish, and I'm like, I like that beard. He's thinking, Jacqui I think she's looking at me like she likes me. He picks it up, right? So there's always an introjection, projection. We send it, it comes. We send it, it comes. That's psych way dummied down, forgive me, but that's what happens. The dynamic between blacks and whites is a particular kind of projection, introjection. Projection, you are not human. That's what Thomas Jefferson said, and we believe it. You are not human. You are only 3/5 of one. You are not beautiful. You are not smart. You are not. Everything I might not be, you are not. That's the projection. I hate you because, well, maybe I'm not, you know? You with me?
I'm wondering if I might add in the way that Jews struggle with the white supremacist tropes about us. And John and I were talking about it actually downstairs. I happen to think your husband is awesome.
He is. If we could clone white people like John, we'd be rich. Yeah.
So the tropes about Jews are the opposite. It's like we are freaks of nature. We are like the X-Men. We are like, in a weird way, inferior, superior. You control everything. Like, why don't you just, call, I was laughing to myself about this. Why don't I just call the media that I control and get some better publicity for this? I mean, it's like crazy. It's like, hey, Rabbi, how are interest rates going to go? I mean, it's insane, crazy theories about Jewish power. And to pretend, and there's new data, like 25% of Americans believe that Israel controls everything behind the scenes. You're talking like caused 9/11, you're talking crazy stuff, and Jews control the media, and Jews control Wall Street, and Jews control politics, and Jews control. What does that do to the individual? In addition to putting them at risk for getting shot or other horrible things, we're getting real close, I fear, to an era of lynchings against Jews.
Oh, yeah.
And if, praise God, that is not the reality you face, it sets you up for failure. Yes. You are the dumbest Jewish person on earth. You are the least competent, least powerful, least able. We want to talk about depression rates among Jewish teens. You didn't go to Princeton. You didn't go to Harvard. You're not an MD, PhD who happens to also be an astronaut. Like, you're not Ellen Greenspan. You're not, name Jewish heroes. We're actually in creating idols of people we look up to, and more importantly, that other people look up to. Oh, you're a rabbi. You must be as funny as Jerry Seinfeld. No, I'm a really boring rabbi, and that's okay. And like, it is setting typical American Jews, Ashkenazi, Jews of color are dealing with it on both sides. It's like, you're the best and the worst. You're superhuman and subhuman and therefore not human. Like, I can't even begin to imagine what Jews of color experienced growing up. And certainly in rising generations, you're talking like a quarter, maybe a third. You're talking a huge percentage of American Jews are Jews of color. Depression rates. I'm not a reefer madness guy, but people who depend on marijuana. Marijuana use rates as a therapeutic because of the need for that type of release from tension and pressure. You're talking about suicidality. You're talking about really serious things because if you don't look like Wolverine, and he's got some pretty good payas among other things, but it's like if you're not somehow superhuman, then you're nothing.
Yeah, that's right. I really hear that, Josh, and I'm grateful for just the way you said it. And I want to turn our lens to white people now, to whiteness, and not white person, individual, but the trope of whiteness, the creation of whiteness, the white supremacist ideologies that are lodged in whiteness, and how we know there's only one race, and that's human. And we know that whiteness has been constructed against blackness and against Jewishness and against Latinx, Hispanic, against Asian. The construct of white, there's a really beautiful book called Learning to be White by a black sociologist named Tandeka, Learning to be White. Tandeka, it's not a new book, but it's very powerful. Black woman observing white children learning to be white. Like, what is it that the world teaches white people about white? And Ruby writes about this and talks about this as well, that even white people, Ruby Sales says, gives up on other white people. Like there's a kind of, I'm gonna say a thingifying. There's a thingifying of Jews, and there's a thingifying of blacks. There's a thingifying of Asian women, all the things that we know are the caricatures that become stereotypes that we end up living with. I think white people also, unless you're super white, to use some of your language about a superhero, if you're super white, which means you're white, rich, Christian, straight, and male, and rich, let me say rich again, that's the super white people. Those are the real white people. The rest of the white people are passing for white. They're passing for white. They're not white enough. You ain't got no money, you are not white enough. Ask the child in Appalachia. Ask the child that's in therapy with my friend. Ask the child who's on the street because their parents put them out because they're queer. They're not white enough. They're not. White people are rich, white, rich, white, straight, male, Christian, white. And everybody else is in the caste that's lower than that. And that's a fact. So in a way, Josh, I keep wanting us to pull ourselves all back to that. Do we want that? That's the common enemy. I want the white teenager. I'm gonna say, I want Graham and Amanda's babies who are growing up in this church. I want those babies to never think they have to try on whiteness in order to be okay. I want them, they have amazing parents. That's likely gonna happen. But I don't want them to go away to college and have to try on whiteness. Be an asshole at a fraternity party, drink too much, call a girl the N-word, prove to somebody that they're white enough to be a bigot, drink in the values of that white supremacy, cheat on their income tax, right? Bet on football games, have a secret life of anger and vehemence at the hockey. Do you understand what I'm talking about? All that stuff is real.
Yep.
And it's like characterizations of white that even young white people have to drink the Kool-Aid of white to survive in this effed up nation. I don't want that. I don't want the queer white girl whose pronouns are they to have to adopt white pictures of femininity I think white supremacy is the enemy of all of us. And I would love for us to talk about that more and think about that more so that the movement that we build includes all of us who understand that we're in prison to tropes that no longer work, that never worked. But we got it. We got Jefferson saying, those Negroes, boop, boop, we don't like them. We got France buying it. We got pseudo-race science. We got Caucasoid mountains. Don't call anybody a Caucasian ever again. Say it with me, never again.
Never again.
Caucasian is a made-up race class, made up by Nazi types who went and studied skulls in the Caucasus Mountains and decided this skull's cutest. I'm gonna call that race number one. Caucasoid, Mongoloid, Negroid, please don't buy into that. The science, the fake science of race that gets exported back to the United States in Philadelphia. Some stupid scientist there, yep, that's right. These skulls are the best ones. The black people's heads are too big, too long, too whatever. Their butts are too whatever. All of these things are in us. They are in the culture. The black Totentot, the woman that was a beautiful Venus Totentot, like a beautiful body. Oh, this aberration of butts and asses and breasts and penises and faces and physiognomy, all of it with attributions ascribed to it of less than. I can't take it. We gotta work against that together. Was that a little emotional? Sorry.
Couple of reflections
Please.
immediately. One is the siren sound that Jews can assimilate into whiteness, or Ashkenazi Jews can. My grandparents took English lessons as native English speakers, so they would get rid of their Yiddish accents and could get jobs. Literally, it was seen as part of their education as kids. If you heard my grandparents of blessed memory who spent a lot of time Lower East Side to Bayside, New York, they would say things perfectly because that was part of being Jewish to them, because it was part of erasing of self. I wonder openly, and I'm not trying to cast judgment, I want to wonder openly about the decline in use of ritual articles in public all the time for Jews. You think of kippot, you think of other types of head coverings, you think of other ways that people were identifiably Jewish. And isn't it just so much easier for Ashkenazi Jews who are conditionally white-ish until all of a sudden they're not, to just kind of pass? It's much easier to ride the subway if you're not wearing a kippah. No one says mean things to you. It's much easier to walk down the street if you're not wearing a kippah. And so there is this siren song of assimilation, not be American, but by implication, be American, parentheses, and white. And so I see a lot of people, again, I think America has been remarkable to the Jews by and large, certainly compared to a lot of other places we've been. But to what extent are we dancing this dance? And how do we replace it with something better?
Are you white, Josh?
No.
Talk about that. I loved your talk about that Friday.
Thank you. So short version is no. Longer version is it's complicated. Based on an American racial caste system, I was conditionally white as of maybe the 1970s. And that is white when it's convenient for whiter people. When I can be used as the wedge against all of the people who are even less white than me, oh yeah, I am as white as they get. I am the bleach of America. And then when all of a sudden, you got Nazis marching in Charlottesville, they're talking about me in racial terms. Jews will not replace us. They're talking about as an ethnic, racial group. They're not saying we don't like that you use Hebrew in prayer services. They're saying your physical existence as a race is an offense to my whiteness. And so I feel white until I feel very much not white. And I feel integrated until I feel very much disintegrated. And I feel a part of the society and love it, and I'm such a loyal American. And I have a go bag in my home that has passports for every family member, has a deed to our house, has money from my grandfather who as a 17-year-old fled Nazi Germany. What did he give us in his will? He gave us gold coins that we could melt down and sell anywhere. So if we needed to smuggle ourselves across the border, we could. Ask American Jews if they have a go bag. Ask American, pardon me for being blunt, but ask WASPs how many of them are ready to get out tonight if they have to. And then let's talk about whether Jews are white. And by the way, irony of ironies, my son and I are German citizens. He's like blonde hair, blue eyes. We roll up to the consulate and they're like, yep, definitely German. That goes to its own Germany continuing to grapple with itself. They look at me in a kippah and a suit and they're like, are you his father? Like, what is your relationship to this young boy? And I'm like, but be that as it may, during the past presidency when I was genuinely worried that I might have to leave, my wife and I have a go plan, which is go to the German consulate, and then they are required to keep us safe. And irony of ironies, Germany sees me as more German than a lot of Americans see me as American. And Germany is our go-to safe haven if, God forbid, Nazis rise in America. How far have we fallen that Germany could save me from being otherized racially in America?
That deserved a beat.
By the way, these are the conversations American Jews have behind closed doors and will not share with other people. Mm-hmm. Because part of the way that we internalize the hatred, I love my parents so much, and they still whisper in restaurants when they talk about anything that could identify them as Jewish. They are worried someone's gonna, I don't know what.
This is a good story, Tone, I don't know. We were in Israel recently. I was in Israel a few months ago. It was a really interesting trip with black civil rights leaders to Israel. And it was the Reformed Jewish, our friends, Jonah Pesner and Rick Jacobs were the leaders of the trip, along with Fred Davey, an African-American wonderful clergyman. And a bunch of us were there. It was really great, and it was really hard. It was really great, it was really hard. And the hard thing happened on Shabbat, on the Friday, where there was a Palestinian missile shot into Israel space, and a 6-year-old girl, I'm doing it wrong, a six-year-old Palestinian girl was killed. And one of the people on the trip, I want to be careful because I love this person, but one of the people on the trip had been in the Israel army because everybody in Israel goes into the army. And they were saying, it looks simple. It looks like a missile came and a 6-year-old Palestinian girl got killed. But that's not really what it is. It's something more than that. There's more going on than meets the eye. There's some intelligence is showing that it was blah, 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 blah. And I was like, actually, but a 6-year-old girl was killed. So what am I wanting to put on the table? We talked about it a little earlier. Accountability to the world we want. I don't want to live in a world where your parents have to whisper anything they're saying about being Jewish in a restaurant. And I don't want to live in a world where Palestinian 6-year-old girls are killed by missiles. And I don't want to live in a world where any place is occupied by anybody. I really don't. I just don't. I want there to be a land for everyone. And it feels to me like there should be able to be a land for everyone. It feels to me that there should be a space for everyone. It feels to me like, damn it, to go back to reparations, we didn't get 40 acres and a mule, but every black child ought to get some repair for the way this country is rich on black backs. Can we get a little college money? Can we get a little tuition? What can we get? I went to a synagogue that we know and love and talked about reparations that way. They did not invite me back. I
You're welcome back here anytime.
Thank you, sweetie. Thanks so much. I frightened them with that. They were like, what do you mean by reparations? I'm like, I think you know. After-school programs paid for, tuitions paid for, home loans cheap. Come on. In any other place in the world had this atrocity happened, right? So what I wanted to link to, Josh, was Germany really effed up. Yep. And they partly owned it. And that's really important. And America really effed up and cannot own it. And that makes this nation unsafe for me. And just because I'm accomplished and friendly doesn't mean I feel safe. I watch that 31-year-old on the sidewalk. I can't unsee it. I cannot unsee they're leaning on him and they're saying, turn over. And I'm like, how is he gonna turn over? And they're moving his arms as though he's an animal and they're tasing him. Josh, with the taser on his body, not away from his body, on his body. And that's like, cops of color. It wasn't just white cops. What have we internalized is what I'm trying to say about our worth and our value and how can we bear it? So, Josh, you and I, y'all, have to unimagine the tropes that have put us here. That black people have tails or they're oversized. You've got horns and a hook nose. You are a cheat, I'm a whore. Like, that's just Hispanic people all like red and too many in a room, whatever, right? We have such ridiculous stories in our head about each other that if we don't change the story, we can't change the story.
So maybe this is a good point to turn outwards, but basically, literally, I mean, you and I have been in a number of conversations about race and anti-Semitism, around the Women's March, around a number of other flashpoints that then gave us the chance to delve more deeply. Yeah. And apart from conversations that I have been a part of with you, almost all of the conversations I've had around race and anti-Semitism have had a counterproductive aspect. So part of me is wondering, what are the conversations we could have instead And why don't we have very different conversations? Why are we so incredibly boring? It's like all of us have talking points. Yeah. It's like, here are my 3 talking points. Yeah. Very few of us come with stories. Right. All of us come with, the worst thing I've heard about your community as opposed to the common humanity. That's its own thing. And the best thing about mine, as opposed to self-critique. And so I'm just wondering how we have a different conversation. The example you gave about a Palestinian 6-year-old. Can an American Jew love Israel and mourn the loss of a 6-year-old Palestinian?
You do.
I do. And
so I would say yes.
Yes, and
yes.
Truth be told, and I've got a very progressive community that wants me to speak with nuance. How many times have I articulated as much from the Bema in a sermon? Not so many times. I mean, I talk to people about it, but I'm not willing to hold that space with a certainty that is needed to actually advance a conversation. So what are the conversations we could be having that are not about saying it's either fighting anti-Semitism or racism? It's your notion of collective liberation. Where do we go from here? Because I loved worship. I would sing and dance off beat any day in the back. And off-key, off-beat, all of it, because I feel so loved that I can just be my full awkward self at the dance party in the way that Ashkenazi Jews sometimes are. But what do we do now? And maybe a good place to start is, what are your questions that maybe we can address? And we would invite courage with those questions, because how often do we avoid asking the real question and instead just sort of demonstrate our own bona fides in asking something that is nice and polite rather than meaningful and substantive? And then second, what do we do next? We study to guide righteous action, according to the Talmud. All right, let's do some study, and then let's act. What does this look like?
Yeah, as those mics are going around, I'm going to say one response to your question. And it is a calling in again. I'm going to keep using that language to call us in. We are not going to get to the promised land with tepid, middle-of-the-road shit. We're not. I have been so lucky at Middle Church. I feel like I've grown up with Aaron. I've been so lucky at Middle Church to be in a community that expects me to be brave. They expect me to be brave. So I'm brave. And I'm braver now than I've ever been, because it's too much, Josh. I mean, I'm older than you, and I'm 63 years old. John says, don't tell her, but I am, and I don't have time. I don't have time. We don't have time. So I want to invite us to think about the brave thing, the bold and brave steps we take to dismantle these stories of oppression that trap us and don't allow us to live free and joy-filled lives. That I want you to be brave. I want to see you be brave. I want to see you be frickin' brave, like our lives depend on it, because they do. Gloria has a question.
Not so much a question as a memory of, 5 or 6 years ago, when 20 or so members of Middle talked and argued and explored race together as a group. And that experience was profound for me. I mean, I think about it often. And I'm wondering if this might be an opportunity to revisit that with this community. And I think your experiences would bring an added nuance, a new opportunity for learning and exploring. I'm certainly willing to do it again. It may be time.
Gloria, that's so beautiful. Josh and I were talking about every Sunday in February, but yeah, we called a racial task force into being, and maybe we could do it again. That's a beautiful idea. Thank you. Yeah.
I have a question from online from Michelle, which is, how do we take these conversations to the workplace where white supremacy is present in the form of bias, lower wages, but if black people complain, they're marginalized, so you stay silent, strong, and die early?
Yeah. You know, there's a bunch of DEI, diversity, inclusion, and equity conversations happening in workplaces. Some of them are mandated. And I would say to Michelle, I would say to you, if you have an HR committee and your HR committee doesn't have a DEI team, you can raise that. You should be able to raise that without reprimand, without repercussions, without punishment. So do that, try that, and if you feel uncomfortable, organize first. I believe in organizing. So which are the 6 other people with you who think this might be important? And then the 6 of you take it to your boss and say, the time is right in America for this kind of conversation. So maybe that could happen.
Could I jump in? So I want to give my dad credit. So he's spending his failed retirement. He keeps working despite himself. He's a mere 79 next month. And he is studying post-colonialism and the vestiges of colonialism in the United States and how it plays out in terms of race. And he'd studied DEI as an example. And there's a lot of good and there are some problems. So I get paid more doing DEI work around anti-Semitism than anything else. I refuse to accept it personally. I give it to East End because it doesn't feel kosher to me. And it is, in some companies, an avenue to genuine change. And in some companies, it's, we have a DEI group, therefore we are not racist and not anti-Semitic and not Islamophobic and not on and on and on. So DEI with care. The other piece, there was a really interesting New York Times article that came out, I think today, about wage transparency. And that it actually has a tremendous impact just having known salaries so that you're not comparing yourself with an asymmetry of information. Your employer knows that all the white employees are making more, or, insert category. The people it hurts are the top earners. And it might be time for top earners to consider taking that hit. Maybe wage transparency is an immediate step we can take in a whole bunch of realms.
Reparations, baby.
Yes.
That's great. I'm so glad you said that. Hi.
Hi, my name is Donetta Johnson. I'm the executive director of the Stoutsburg-Saraland African American Museum in central New Jersey, right near Princeton University. We're telling the stories of an original settlement of African Americans from a time of slavery. Their stories, their contributions to the Central Jersey economy. Central Jersey is known as New Jersey is known as the Garden State. Well, there's a bunch of farms, and who did all the farmings? African Americans. So these people have virtually disappeared, except for some of them. And so we're building a community where we're calling people in. However, we need help, and in my travels, I've found that this help most effectively comes from white women. Mm-hmm. How do we get more white women to look racism and their privileged position in the caste system and the destruction to their own community, their own children that racism causes? How do we get them to come into the circle and own it and help dismantle it?
That's an excellent question. I'm looking at my friend Amanda, wondering if she wants to take it. There's 2 things I would say, and then Amanda, you might want to take that. There's a book called Raise Your Hand, Raising Our Hands, Jenna Arnold. Am I saying her name right? I think that's a really pretty good book, ma'am, about calling white women in. And that white woman right there, Amanda, is on our team who does a pretty good job of calling white women in. Do you want to answer that question? Can you come up here a little bit, baby, because people online won't be able to see you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. This is Amanda Hamburg-Ashcraft, Raising Imagination.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your question. I'll first start by saying you're absolutely right. Like, white women have such a unique place in this conversation and hold an immense, unique privilege and power to be able to speak into it. So I'm grateful for continual learning from people like Jacqui and other Black women to be able to step into it and do it. Hey, Matthew. So I think, just organizing, continually finding and being able to state and say, hey, white women, you do have a unique place in this, being able to openly say that, claim it, and then, is there a person, a white woman who you could start that conversation with? Like, this is where we need to go. We need to do it. And then once you do that, there's always this sort of back and forth between white-only spaces being inherently racist. Rob Stevens taught that. You may have heard him say that before. He's a former minister here as well, and also white people needing to have their own space and time to do the work, separate from the collective liberation of which we know that we're called to do. So there is that balance of, yes, white women, we need to go get our cousins and our aunties and our PTA people and all that, and also it can't only be in our isolated spaces, because we aren't it, period. We're just not it. And we have so much learning to continually do as well. There is a documentary that's just recently out that I'd love to bring here called Deconstructing Karen. Maybe you've heard of it. And it's the book that just came out that Fox News is all over by, Regina and Sarah. Yeah, and what's it, is it just Dear White Women? Okay, it's called White Women, but I'd love, maybe that's a step we could take here, and we could connect about how to, bridge our communities to continue that work. I don't know if I said.
That's perfect, sweetie. Can you give her my card also? I want to say that John Janka, thank you, Amanda, that was perfect. John Janka, John, raise your hand. John Janka is a consultant to congregations. We've done a bunch of race work together, including living in the same house. But we're bringing back our consulting practice. I want to let you know at middlechurch.org. So I know John's recruiting Amanda. We want to make sure that we offer what we know. And what we know is how to build multiracial, multi-ethnic coalitions that are interfaith.
Hi,
Hey,
Jacqui.
Mark.
Hi, how are you?
Good, honey.
I'm curious to hear you talk more about the nuance of the conversation. I have the privilege of leading the Office of Non-Public Schools for the Department of Education, which supports 913 non-public religious and independent schools across the city. So in one day, I can go from an Islamic school to a Catholic school to a Seventh-day Adventist to a yeshiva. And we are working with our staff to have these difficult conversations, and we end up often in the what about me, what about me? I can't hear you because you don't hear me. And my oppression is worse than your oppression. And then you add on top of that, my office is also responsible for the yeshiva investigations, which is in the New York Times. So the pressure that our staff is under, being a diverse staff of some that are atheists, some that are Catholic, some that are Christian, some that are gay like myself and struggle to go into the schools that hate me for being gay. And so I'm curious how you two navigated that and how you might suggest others could start that conversation.
It's a great question.
I had the joy of getting breakfast with Dr. Ibu Patel on Friday.
Yeah.
And he was unpacking the situation going on at a college about the image of Muhammad. And what he spoke about so elegantly was internal diversity being key. And so a lot of people, maybe there's a touch of truth to it. He's an Ismaili Muslim, which is a subset of Shia Islam, which is a minority within Islam, which is a small minority within the United States. He's somebody who finds physical depictions of Prophet Muhammad to be beautiful and appropriate and a manifestation of faith. Some Sunni Muslims find it to be a desecration of Prophet Muhammad. What he brought to the fore in the conversation as they're trying to, or have already dismissed this adjunct professor, is the idea that there are more stories than my own. So it might be, which stories, plural, do I carry with me? I always reference my grandparents because they are always with me, and yet they are not me. So it might be worth storytelling and starting there so that it's not just like, hey, I'm Catholic. It's, I went to a Jesuit school. Here's what I absolutely loved, the way that Aristotelian thought and medieval Christian thought were brought together by key scholars, Thomas Aquinas being one of them. Here's my favorite book. So I wonder if it might be longer times telling stories with fewer people and just going around and letting an entire session be on one person talking about what they don't typically speak of. Because once you get into the nuance of the sub-community, all of a sudden people aren't jumping on each other. they're listening in really curious ways.
I love that answer. And I'm only going to add to it, John, we'll call on you, John. I want to add to it, Mark, every day in every team, there can be a storytelling moment. We almost always start our meeting at Middle Church board or in staff about, like, what's a story we're going to do to prompt the storytelling, which just builds trust and empathy. So yes, 100%, and can be a ritual that you make happen at every meeting, every team meeting. We're going to tell stories. So people stop thinking about the other as just a category, but they're a full human. John?
Yeah, just a couple of comments about these difficult conversations. It really is helpful to have agreements before you get into these conversations about what our norms are going to be, how we will regard one another, what's out of bounds, what is okay to say, what is okay to feel, what is okay to communicate how you feel without damaging the other. So people often have very deep feelings, but they get into the air in damaging ways. So there's a certain preparation for difficult conversations that groups need to have to keep people safe, but also to get at the truth. And there are mechanisms for that, there are resources for that, and if we're really going to try to go in that direction, we need to avail ourselves of those resources.
Johnny, thank you for that. There's a great book called Difficult Conversations. And what's the website I'm thinking of? Smart people who remember? Rob Stevens worked for them. Racial Equity Institute. Yeah, there's some good resources there. And at middlechurch.org, we have good stuff. Maybe just, yeah. I know, I'm sorry, I just lost it. I'm like, what? Okay.
Hello, my name is Yuri. I'm actually Donnetta's partner, so also from Central New Jersey. Just to identify myself, I'm the child of a Holocaust survivor from Austria. I also have a go bag. I've got my Austrian passport, sitting in my desk at home with a lot of misgivings. But I wanted to address this idea of self-criticism. In my view, Jews have been playing both sides for a very long time. And what I mean by that is, if you go all the way back to the Civil War and the Confederacy, the second in command of the Confederacy was a Jewish guy. And if I look at my own family, the passion with which they embrace whiteness, i.e. anti-blackness, is intense. When I married an African-American woman, my grandmother, essentially a peasant, Polish peasant, basically said, "We were black in Europe. Why would you want to be black again?" And so I think my question is really, until Jews come to grips with this racial reckoning, until Jews actually start working, with a little bit more honesty about smashing whiteness and dismantling this whole concept, we're still going to be ending up in conflict with the black community, as happens again and again. So that's the question.
Thank you.
So something that I appreciate deeply about what you said is I like the idea of the self-critique, and maybe that's actually a really helpful place for a lot of people to start from a lot of different communities. We usually start with self-glorification. And what you just did, in a way that part of me, I think I was triggered and appreciative all at once. And triggered because it was, what are all the Christians going to think? Are you putting us in danger? Let's talk about it in our closed Jewish room. This is, yes, this is a Jewish sanctuary, but look, we've got guests here. We don't talk about that at the table with guests. And incredibly grateful because I think there are a lot of people who could tell parallel stories based on the group identifications they have and how they interact with other communities. So I'm guessing I'm coming out by saying yes, and what you just said terrifies me. And it reminds me of the rabbinic story Hillel and Shammai, classic debates, two rabbinic schools, and they always disagree with each other. And Hillel is determined to be the default winner, not because of the content of his debates, but because he could always state the argument of the person who disagreed with him before he shared his own. And you just did something very akin to that. You just described faults you've seen, problems you've seen in your family, in the American Jewish community. I don't know how universal they are, but to say that they don't exist, they definitely exist to some extent. And then you were able to talk about what you want to have happen next. So the methodology that you shared is every bit as important as the content.
That's really beautiful, Josh. We are going to get to rapping in a second because one of us is about to implode. And I
think both of us.
I am an extrovert off the charts, and my E is running out the room right now. But to say this as a way to wrap, Josh, I invite you to do the same as our host. W.E.B. Du Bois said the problem of the 20th century was the color line. The problem of the 22nd century is the color line. The problem of the 22nd century is the concept of whiteness as an artificial construct that hurts everybody. That's the problem. So if that's the problem, then I think we're all the solution. We are all the solution. We all have a little something to offer to create a new story. We do this work, we have this conversation to invite you to be self-reflective. John and I wrote a book called 10 Essential Strategies to Build a Multicultural Church. There's an exercise in that. We can make that available to you without buying the book, but a kind of my own race story kind of exercise. When's the first time I knew there was a thing called race? How did I learn it? What role was I playing in that story, you know? Those kinds of sit with yourself times where you get to say, in my family, Yuri knows what happened in his story, in his family. Like Josh knows his, like I know mine, like Danita knows hers. But we all inherit stories that shape us. And we are all walking around like the tops of icebergs, and underneath the water is the story that shaped us. And sometimes we bump into each other and we like kick each other's knees in because we don't know what's going on down here. But I think our job as humans on the planet is to get self-conscious, to get self-aware, to know our stuff and claim it and own it, our beautiful stuff and our prickly parts, and to explore our interior and love ourselves and forgive ourselves and love ourselves and forgive ourselves and love ourselves in a pattern, a spiritual pattern, an ethical pattern of knowing, so we can be better. Because if we're better, we can make the world better. I don't want you to leave this room feeling ashamed. I don't want you to leave this room feeling like a failure. I want you to leave this room feeling like a child of God, a beautiful child of the universe, like love wrapped in human flesh. Love wrapped in human flesh. Light wrapped in human flesh. And all you've got to do to make the world better is to turn your best gaze on it and know that it starts with you.
So I too am feeling the exhaustion.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you might do us the kindness of sharing with us your reading list.
I will.
And then we can conclude.
Here's some books. I thought you were going to ask me to sing. This is Josh's book, Awakenings, American Jewish Transformations in Identity, Leadership, and Belonging. I read it, not because I'm Jewish, but because I wanted to know Josh, and it is a fantastic book. And there's bunches of them around here. So if you're nice to him, he might give you one. That's nice. This is Testament of Hope. I'll go do it second. Please don't think that Dr. King only said, I have a dream. Or wrote Letter from a Birmingham Jail. That's not what happened. There's so many words in here from television interviews and handwritten notes. I think mine is old, and I read it all the time. There are lots of books about whiteness, and I only brought this one, but it's not because there's not others, right? Jennifer Harvey has a really beautiful book about raising white children, but this one I think is pretty, and Robin DiAngelo's book will make you cry, about white privilege. But this White Rage book, wow, it really makes me think about what we're experiencing in Trumpism, what we're experiencing in the Republican Party, how angry white people are that they are not as white as they used to be, thanks be to God. And this book, this black girl named Jacqui wrote this book called Fierce Love, and it got cast as a self-help book, and it so is not. It is a ass-kicking, straightforward memoir about my life and my story and how I learned to be brave in 9 steps for you to learn to be brave and to get fierce with your love. So buy that as well if you want to. It's easy to listen to on Kindle. Everybody, Natalie, Ben, my whole staff, all y'all, my elders and deacons that stayed in the room, all y'all, all y'all, all y'all, all you, and Josh. Can we give you a blessing?
So the priestly blessing is the first in the Torah that human beings gave to each other. Could I give that one?
Please.
And then you could close us out with...
Okay. Go ahead, buddy.
Here, I'm going to put my arm around you.
I love him. He's so great.
Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May God bless you and protect you. Yair Adonai panav elecha v'yichuneka. May God shine God's countenance upon you and be merciful to you. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May God never for a second turn away from you and always grant you the gift we know of as shalom, of wholeness of mind and body and spirit. And on this King Day, this sacred teaching of beloved community, as together we say, Amen.
Amen. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, walking up to freedom land. Don't let nobody turn you around from fierce love and freedom. Amen.
Amen.